The morning air was crisp as Lila stepped out of the taxi, her heels clicking against the polished marble of the corporate plaza. The building towered above her, sleek glass panels reflecting the rising sun, a silent reminder of the world she was stepping into, a world she had dreamed of, and now, nervously, she was part of it. Inside, the lobby was quiet, almost sterile, with the faint hum of air conditioning and the occasional rustle of papers from the reception desk. Lila adjusted the strap of her handbag, trying to steady the flutter in her chest. This was her first day at Sterling & Vale, one of the most prestigious marketing firms in the city. Every corner spoke of success, precision, and power. And at the top of it all, Adrian Vale. She had heard of him, the enigmatic CEO who ran the company with an iron fist wrapped in charm. But nothing could prepare her for the moment she saw him in person. Adrian was standing by the glass wall of his office, his back straight, suit perfectly tailored, eyes fixed somewhere in the distance. He didn't glance at her, didn't even acknowledge her arrival. Yet, there was an intensity in the way he observed the office around him, a quiet, almost predatory awareness. Lila felt it like a jolt, an invisible line of tension stretching between them. Clearing her throat softly, she approached the receptionist. "Hi, I'm Lila Moreno. First day. HR said to meet here." The receptionist smiled politely. "Welcome, Ms. Moreno. Adrian Vale, he's, usually busy, but you'll get the orientation in an hour." Lila nodded, swallowing the lump of nerves in her throat. She couldn't help sneaking another glance at Adrian. He hadn't moved. But then, slightly, almost imperceptibly, his eyes flicked toward her. A single moment, a faint arch of his brow. It was gone before she could be sure she saw it. She sat on the sleek leather bench, heart still racing. Something about him was unsettlingly magnetic, cold, controlled, yet strangely compelling. There was a story behind those distant eyes, and for some reason, she felt both intimidated and curious. Her phone buzzed with a reminder of her schedule, snapping her out of the moment. She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to focus. Today was only the beginning, and somewhere behind that glass wall, Adrian Vale had already noticed her. A distant memory of a warning from a friend crossed her mind. Be careful around him. He doesn't notice mistakes or people easily. Lila adjusted her blazer, squared her shoulders, and reminded herself she wasn't here to be noticed. She was here to make her mark. And yet, a tiny spark of anticipation lingered, one she didn't fully understand. By mid-morning, Lila had settled into her desk, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, heart still thrumming from her first encounter with Adrian. She tried to focus on the onboarding documents, the crisp corporate jargon filling the space around her, but her mind kept wandering back to the faint flicker of recognition she thought she saw in his eyes. It was then, walking past his office on a quiet corridor, that she caught something she never expected. Adrian's office door was slightly ajar, the sunlight casting sharp lines across the polished floor. Curiosity nudged her forward, just enough to peek inside. Adrian was on the phone. At first, his posture was the same as always, rigid, composed, commanding. But as he spoke, his shoulders slumped slightly, his hand brushing a loose strand of hair from his forehead. His voice softened, careful and almost tender. I know. I'll make time, promise," he said quietly, almost apologetically. There was a pause, a gentle laugh, the kind that rarely escaped his public persona. "I miss you too. Am more than you know." Lila froze. The man she had thought untouchable, distant, and cold this side of him was unexpected, human, vulnerable. She could see the faint tension around his jaw soften, the tight line of his mouth easing. For the first time, he wasn't Adrian Vale, the untouchable CEO. He was simply Adrian, a brother worried for his sister. Her heartbeat quickened, a mix of awe and confusion swirling in her chest. The office rumors made more sense now. The whispers of family tragedy, of a childhood wrapped in responsibility and silence. The coldness, the control, the distance, it wasn't arrogance. It was protection, carefully practiced over years of expectation. Lila stepped back quietly, her mind racing. Should she retreat? Should she approach him? The hallway felt suddenly narrower, charged with tension she couldn't quite name. Her instincts told her to stay invisible, Yet a strange pull urged her to understand him, to see more beyond the mask. As she returned to her desk, her fingers trembling slightly over her notes, she realized something important. Adrian Vale was more complicated than anyone had said, and somehow she wanted, against reason, to unravel the layers, even if it meant risking discomfort, confusion, or heartbreak. The phone conversation ended, and Adrian straightened, his public mask sliding back into place. Lila exhaled softly, her curiosity now a spark she couldn't ignore. The office buzzed softly with the rhythm of mid-morning activity. Lila's fingers hovered over the keyboard, reviewing a report she had spent the past hour perfecting. Her phone buzzed with a message from her manager, urgent yet cryptic. Adrian needs the latest campaign stats. Now. Panic flickered through her chest. She grabbed the file, her heels clicking quickly against the polished floor as she approached Adrian's office. The glass door loomed before her, a barrier between the world she knew and the one she was still learning to navigate. Adrian was already there, standing beside the massive mahogany desk, arms crossed, eyes scanning a spreadsheet on his tablet. His posture was impeccably still, but there was an edge in the set of his jaw, a flicker of impatience that made Lila's pulse quicken. "Ms. Moreno," he said without looking up, his voice low, calm, but with a sharp undercurrent. "Is this the latest data for the Roth campaign?" "Yes, sir," Lila replied, trying to steady her hands. She handed over the tablet, watching as his gaze finally lifted to meet hers. For a fraction of a second, the ice-cold barrier cracked. His eyes held a flicker of something. Attentiveness, curiosity. She couldn't tell. "You've included the demographic split here," he said, scrolling quickly. "And the engagement metrics are accurate." His tone was neutral, almost clipped, but the subtle emphasis on accurate felt like both acknowledgement and challenge. Lila's throat tightened. She wasn't used to being scrutinized so intensely, yet there was a thrill in the attention, sharp and disorienting. "Thank you, sir. I double-checked everything." He studied her for a long beat, as if weighing her confidence against her words. "I can see that," he said finally, his voice softening just enough to suggest that he recognized her effort. A brief nod, almost imperceptible, and the steel in his gaze returned. Before Lila could respond, he turned back to his tablet. "Keep this up. It's promising," he added, and then, as abruptly as he had appeared, Adrian moved away, leaving her standing in the doorway, heart still racing. Alone now, Lila exhaled slowly, trying to process the collision of irritation and something unnameable she had felt. He was impossible to read, frustrating and magnetic all at once. She sank back into her chair, her mind spinning with questions she didn't yet know how to ask. And yet, despite the confusion, a small, quiet spark of anticipation lingered, a feeling she couldn't ignore, one that promised their paths would cross again very soon. The office was quieter than usual that afternoon, the soft hum of computers and distant phone rings filling the background. Lila sat at her desk, reviewing campaign notes, but her thoughts kept drifting back to Adrian. There was something more behind the controlled, distant man she had met, something she couldn't yet put into words. As she sipped her coffee, a colleague approached, leaning casually against the partition. "You're new, right, Lila?" "Yes," she replied, offering a polite smile. "I'm still finding my way around." He nodded knowingly. Be careful around Adrian Vale. Most people see him as unapproachable, cold, but there's more to him than anyone realizes. Lila tilted her head. "More." He hesitated, lowering his voice. "He's complicated. Family troubles. He lost a lot when he was younger, responsibilities most people wouldn't understand. He's built walls around himself, walls that keep everyone out, even people who care." The words sank into her, echoing the subtle hints she had noticed, the fleeting softness in his expressions, the rare attentiveness she glimpsed during their brief interactions. Lila felt a flicker of empathy, an urge to understand him rather than judge. Later, when she passed Adrian's office, she noticed a framed photograph on his desk, partially hidden from view. She paused, her gaze catching the edges of a young boy and a woman, smiling in a garden that seemed far removed from the sleek office world. Her pulse quickened. Behind the polished exterior, Adrian had a life, a history, a burden she could almost feel radiating from him. As she returned to her desk, Lila's thoughts swirled. She remembered the fleeting moments of vulnerability she had glimpsed, his gentle tone on the phone, the subtle nod of recognition during their first interaction. The more she learned, the more his cold demeanor made sense. It wasn't arrogance or indifference. It was caution, shaped by pain and responsibility. The office whispers and small discoveries began to paint a portrait of a man she could no longer see as a distant, untouchable figure. He was layered, guarded, and human in ways she had never expected. And as much as she wanted to stay invisible, a quiet curiosity stirred, a desire to understand him, to see past the walls he had built. Lila exhaled slowly, leaning back in her chair. One thing was clear. There was more to Adrian Vale than anyone let on, and she had only just begun to scratch the surface. The morning sunlight streamed through the office windows, casting sharp lines across Lila's desk as she reviewed the latest campaign brief. Her coffee had long gone cold, but her nerves were buzzing with anticipation. A knock on her office door made her jump slightly. "Ms. Moreno," a voice called smooth, controlled, and unmistakably Adrian's. She looked up to see him standing there, tablet in hand, expression unreadable. "You're assigned to the ROF launch," he said, placing the tablet gently on her desk. "It's high profile. Mistakes aren't acceptable." Lila blinked, processing both the weight of the assignment and the intensity in his gaze. I understand, sir," she managed, her voice steady despite the rapid thump of her heart. Adrian's lips pressed into a thin line, and for a moment, she caught the briefest flicker of approval in his eyes. "Good. I expect updates by end of day." And with that, he was gone, leaving behind a charged silence that made the air feel almost heavier. As she dug into the project, she felt the invisible pull of his expectations. Every decision, every detail, was under the shadow of Adrian's exacting standards. Yet, when she requested clarification, he would appear at her desk almost silently, offering a brief explanation. His proximity, though professional, carried a subtle tension, his shoulder brushing hers as he leaned over to pointed data, fingers accidentally grazing her hand. Lila's cheeks warmed, and she quickly looked away, focusing on the spreadsheet in front of her. She could feel the energy between them, a mix of challenge and something unspoken, like a silent acknowledgement of competence mingled with unintentional intimacy. Hours passed in a delicate rhythm of collaboration. She noticed his subtle glances, the quick assessments in his eyes, the almost imperceptible nod when she suggested an improvement. And for each fleeting connection, her heart both leapt and stuttered, uncertain how to interpret the attention. By the time the sun dipped low, casting golden streaks across the office floor, Adrian gave a brief, almost casual remark. "You handle that well," he said, eyes briefly meeting hers. The simplicity of the compliment struck her more than any grand gesture could have. He turned away, leaving Lila with the tablet and a head full of racing thoughts. She exhaled slowly, heart still fluttering. This project was more than a test of skill. It was a test of endurance, composure, and understanding the man behind the impossible standards. And as she packed her things for the evening, one truth lingered in her mind. Working alongside Adrian Vale was challenging, exhilarating, and strangely intoxicating. The first drops of rain splattered against the office windows, just as Lila gathered her things. By the time she reached the building's front doors, the sky had darkened, and sheets of rain were lashing the streets. She hurried toward the curb, hoping the storm would pass quickly, when a familiar voice called out. "Wait here," Adrian said, striding through the downpour with an umbrella already raised. Before she could protest, he stepped closer, tilting it toward her, so they could share the cover. The space between them felt electric, charged with an unspoken awareness neither had yet admitted. They walked in silence for a few moments, the city blurred around them in shimmering rain. Lila's heart pounded, every accidental brush of his arm sending a strange warmth through her chest. She dared a glance at his profile, focused, calm, yet something in his eyes hinted at fatigue, and something heavier, deeper. Finally, she couldn't resist. You didn't have to wait," she said softly, her voice barely audible over the rain. Adrian's lips curved into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. "I couldn't leave you in that," he said quietly. "Storms aren't always just about rain." The cryptic words made her pause. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, glancing at the street ahead. "Sometimes life hits in ways you can't control. You learn to carry it alone, or you find someone you trust enough to share it with." His hand brushed hers slightly as he adjusted the umbrella, a fleeting, accidental touch that made her inhale sharply. Lila swallowed, feeling the vulnerability in her own chest rise. I'm not always good at asking for help," she admitted, eyes downcast. "I'm used to trying to manage everything on my own." Adrian's gaze softened, the tension around his shoulders easing. "Neither am I," he confessed, voice low. "And yet sometimes, sharing it makes the weight lighter." The words hung in the air between them, intimate and fragile. Lila's pulse quickened, caught between fear and fascination, as she realized the rare trust forming in that brief, stolen moment. By the time they reached the entrance to her apartment building, the rain had eased into a gentle drizzle. Adrian offered a slight nod, stepping back, letting the moment linger. She exhaled softly, her mind spinning. Tonight had changed something. Lines had shifted, walls had begun to crack, and neither of them could ignore the pull that had been quietly growing since their first encounter. The office felt unusually tense that morning. Lila sat at her desk, staring at her laptop screen, her fingers hovering but unable to type. She had just received an email from Adrian regarding the Roth campaign, and something about his wording, short, clipped, and pointed, made her stomach twist. "Lila, this report contains errors that should have been avoided. Correct them immediately." Her chest tightened. Errors? She had double-checked every detail. Frustration and hurt rose sharply. She felt exposed, embarrassed, and most painfully betrayed. The sting wasn't just about the work, it was about Adrian, his seemingly cold dismissal after the rare moments of attention they had shared. Unable to sit in silence any longer, she stood and walked briskly toward his office. The corridor seemed longer than usual, each step punctuated by the hum of distant printers and muted conversations. She knocked firmly. "Adrian, can we talk?" He looked up from his tablet, expression unreadable, eyes scanning her face before settling on hers. "Of course," he said, voice calm but guarded. "I don't understand this email," she began, keeping her voice steady despite the heat in her chest. "I checked everything in you." She paused, swallowing the lump in her throat. "You make it sound like I'm incompetent. Why would you say that?" Adrian's gaze softened slightly, but a faint tension remained. "Lila, that's not what I meant. There are minor inconsistencies." "Minor?" Her voice rose, frustration cracking through. "I spent hours on this. I thought you—" She stopped, heart pounding, searching his face for something. Apology, acknowledgement, anything. "I know you did," Adrian interrupted gently, leaning back in his chair, fingers steepled. "And I appreciate your effort. But accuracy is critical. You know that." She shook her head, misinterpreting the controlled tone as cold dismissal. "So that's it. You don't trust me." Her hands trembled slightly, emotions raw and exposed. Adrian stood and moved closer, but in her mind, the proximity felt like accusation rather than reassurance. "Lila, you're misunderstanding." "I'm not misunderstanding," she snapped, stepping back. I thought there was more." Her words faltered, unspoken feelings tangled with professional pride. He exhaled, a quiet sigh, realizing she hadn't yet grasped his intent. "Please, let me explain later. I didn't mean for it to come across like this." She didn't wait for him to continue. Heart racing, she turned and walked away, the sting of perceived rejection pressing against her chest. And as she returned to her desk, her thoughts swirled. Was he really as distant as he seemed, or was she simply seeing what she feared? The tension lingered in the office air, unresolved, setting the stage for the next encounter where clarity, and perhaps trust, would be tested. The office felt unusually quiet that afternoon, a calm punctuated only by the soft clicking of keyboards and distant phone calls. Lila sat at her desk, staring blankly at her screen, still unsettled from the morning confrontation with Adrian. Her frustration lingered, tangled with guilt, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she had misread him, or worse, that he had misread her. "Rough morning," a familiar voice asked from across the partition. Lila looked up to see Marcus, a senior marketing strategist she had barely interacted with before, leaning casually on his chair. His eyes were warm, a rare contrast to the office's usual formality. "You could say that," she admitted, closing her laptop slightly. "It's complicated." Marcus nodded knowingly. "I've been there. Adrian doesn't make things easy at first glance. Most people see his cold exterior and run, or get frustrated, but he's not what he seems." Lila tilted her head, curiosity piqued. "Not what he seems." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "He carries a lot of weight. Family pressures, expectations, things he doesn't talk about. And he's protective of the people who matter to him, in ways that aren't obvious. He notices things quietly, evaluates you silently, and when he shows approval, it's rare but meaningful." Lila absorbed his words, letting them settle in her mind. She recalled fleeting moments, his subtle nod at her work, the way he had paused to explain the Roth campaign metrics, even the small gesture of sharing the umbrella in the rain. Pieces of the puzzle she hadn't understood before now clicked into place. "Really?" she asked softly, a small smile forming despite the lingering tension. "So, I'm not imagining these moments." Marcus chuckled lightly. "No, he's complicated, yes, but capable of noticing effort and heart in a way few people do. Keep that in mind." Later, as Lila returned to her work, she noticed Adrian across the office, reviewing documents. He caught her glance for a brief second, eyes flickering with something unreadable, something that, for a moment, resembled admiration. She felt a subtle warmth in that silent acknowledgement, a recognition of her perseverance, her commitment, and perhaps, her kindness. Lila exhaled softly, her thoughts clearer than before. Understanding him didn't mean excusing the tension, but it gave her perspective. And somewhere deep inside, she felt a tentative hope, a bridge forming between misunderstanding and connection, one that neither of them had fully crossed yet. The quiet office seemed charged now with possibility. Tomorrow, she realized, could change everything. The grand ballroom shimmered under crystal chandeliers, golden light reflecting off polished floors and mirrored walls. Soft classical music floated through the air, mingling with the murmur of voices in tailored suits and flowing gowns. Lila stepped cautiously into the crowd, the silk of her dress brushing lightly against her legs, heart racing with a mix of excitement and apprehension. She scanned the room, catching glimpses of colleagues laughing in small clusters, champagne glasses catching the light. And then, through the throng, she saw him, Adrian, immaculately dressed in a dark suit, standing near the stage, calm and composed as if the glittering world around him didn't exist. Her chest tightened. He glanced toward her, eyes meeting hers for a brief, lingering moment. A flicker of recognition passed across his expression, subtle but undeniable. The crowd seemed to blur around them as she made her way closer, trying to steady her nerves. A toast was underway when Adrian finally approached, offering a polite nod. "Lila," he said, his voice low and smooth, carrying over the music. "You clean up well." Her cheeks warmed, a smile tugging at her lips. "Thank you, sir. You look formidable as always." His lips quirked slightly at the word, amusement flickering in his eyes. "Formidable," he echoed softly. "I'll take it." They navigated the gala side by side, exchanging brief conversations with colleagues. Every interaction was punctuated by subtle tension, the accidental brush of their hands when passing hors d'oeuvres, shared glances across the room, the quiet gravity in his eyes whenever he addressed her. Each small gesture was loaded with unspoken meaning, a dance of proximity and restraint. At one point, the crowd momentarily parted, and they found themselves standing near the grand staircase, away from prying eyes. Adrian's expression softened, and for a heartbeat the cool, controlled CO gave way to something more personal. "You've handled yourself impressively tonight," he said, voice just above a whisper. Not many could navigate this without flinching. Lila's heart thudded against her ribs. I try, she admitted, brushing a loose strand of hair behind her ear. It's easier when you're not as intimidating as you appear. He chuckled softly, a warm sound that seemed almost intimate in the soft glow of the chandeliers. Intimidating is optional, he murmured, letting the words hang between them. His gaze lingered on her face, searching, assessing, yet unspoken emotions simmering just below the surface. The music swelled, and the crowd shifted, pulling them back into the swirl of conversation and laughter. Lila exhaled slowly, the tension in her chest mingling with anticipation, a quiet realization settling over her. Tonight had changed something. Their connection, subtle yet undeniable, had deepened, and neither of them could ignore the pull growing stronger. As she watched Adrian move through the crowd, effortlessly commanding attention, yet somehow aware of her presence, Lila felt a spark of both fear and excitement. The gala was over, but the dance between them, unspoken, charged, and full of possibility, was only beginning. The office was nearly empty that evening. The soft hum of computers and the occasional shuffle of papers, the only sounds accompanying the fading golden light from the windows. Lila lingered by her desk, sorting through campaign notes, when she heard a quiet knock at her office door. "Lila, do you have a moment?" Adrian's voice was calm but carried a subtle weight, a gravity she hadn't heard before. She nodded, gesturing for him to come in. Of course. He entered slowly, removing his jacket, and for the first time that day, he seemed unburdened by the usual rigid composure. His eyes, usually guarded and unreadable, held something softer, something heavy with unspoken truths. "I wanted to explain everything," he began, voice low, deliberate. "I know I can come across as distant, even cold, and I see that it frustrates you. But there's more to it than you've seen." Lila's hands curled around her coffee mug, heart thudding. "Adrian, I want to understand. Really. But sometimes it feels like you're unreachable." He exhaled slowly, rubbing the bridge of his nose. "I inherited responsibilities at a young age, expectations, family burdens that shaped how I interact with the world. I learned to control everything, to anticipate every failure before it happens. It's exhausting, and it makes trust difficult." Her chest tightened, empathy replacing some of the lingering frustration. "So it's not that you don't notice people, or that you don't care?" she asked softly. A faint, almost imperceptible smile touched his lips. "I notice. I see effort, kindness, persistence, qualities I rarely allow myself to recognize openly. You've impressed me, Lila, in ways I didn't expect." The vulnerability in his voice was disarming. Lila felt her own defenses soften, understanding at last that his coldness was a shield, not a judgment. She reached out instinctively, a subtle gesture of reassurance. "Thank you for telling me. I understand more now." He nodded, eyes briefly meeting hers, the weight of unspoken emotions simmering between them. "I didn't want to burden you with this before, but you deserve the truth, and I trust you enough to share it." For a long moment, they simply sat there, the office quiet, the glow of the setting sun washing over them. A bridge had formed, tenuous, fragile, but undeniable. Lila realized that the man she had perceived as unapproachable was, in fact, complex, layered, and capable of great emotional depth. As Adrian finally stood, adjusting his cufflinks, he added quietly, "I hope this changes how you see me. I want you to see who I really am, not just the walls I've built." Lila exhaled softly, a mix of relief and anticipation washing over her. "It does. More than you know." The moment lingered, an unspoken understanding settling between them, laying the foundation for trust, and the possibilities that awaited them beyond the office walls. The office was silent, bathed in the soft glow of desk lamps and the muted reflections from the glass walls. Papers were stacked neatly, chairs tucked in, and the hum of the city outside was distant, almost dreamlike. Lila sat at her desk, finishing up a report, unaware that Adrian had lingered behind, quietly observing her. "Lila." His voice broke the silence, low and deliberate. She looked up, startled, meeting his gaze. There was a weight in his eyes she had never seen before, a mix of determination and vulnerability. He paused, taking a slow step closer. His hand brushed against the edge of her desk, almost accidentally, yet the contact sent a shiver through her. I need to say something. Something I haven't said, not properly. Her heart quickened. She set the pen down, instinctively leaning forward. Adrian. He took a breath, steadying himself. I've tried to maintain control, to keep everything professional, to protect myself, and maybe to protect you from the complexities of who I am. His eyes searched hers, earnest and unflinching. But that's unfair, and I can't do it anymore. Lila's chest tightened, anticipation mingling with fear. Do what? She asked softly, her voice barely audible. I care about you, he admitted, the words deliberate, raw, and tender. More than I probably should, more than I expected to, and I can't hide it anymore, Lila. You've broken through the walls I built, and I want you to know that you matter, that you've mattered for a long time. The confession hung in the quiet office like fragile glass, shimmering under the desk lamp's warm glow. Lila's mind raced, memories of their stolen glances, shared umbrellas, subtle touches, and long hours spent side by side flooding back. She felt a rush of emotion, her own walls softening. She began, hesitating as she searched for the right words. I care about you too, Adrian. I've been unsure, afraid of misreading you, but I feel the same. A faint smile broke across his face, the tension in his shoulders easing, his gaze softening in relief. That's more than I could hope for, he murmured, stepping closer, careful yet deliberate. Their hands brushed again, this time lingering, a quiet acknowledgement of mutual trust and affection. The city lights outside flickered softly, reflecting in the glass walls. For the first time, Lila felt that the distance between them, the barriers, the misunderstandings, the fear, was beginning to dissolve. Tonight, in the quiet office, a truth long held in the heart of one finally met its echo in the other, and the beginning of something new, tentative, fragile, yet full of possibility, was set in motion. The city lights twinkled like scattered jewels against the deepening night sky. From her apartment window, Lila watched the streets below, feeling a quiet warmth spread through her chest. The events of the past weeks, the tension, the misunderstandings, the small sparks of connection, had led to this moment. She could still feel Adrian's words, soft and deliberate, echoing in her mind. A soft knock at the door made her startle. She opened it to find Adrian standing there, coat draped over one arm, his gaze lingering on hers in a way that made her breath hitch. The world outside seemed to disappear, leaving only the quiet intimacy of the hallway between them. May I come in? He asked, voice low and calm, yet carrying an undercurrent of anticipation. Of course, Lila replied, stepping aside, heart racing. She closed the door gently behind him, the soft click echoing like a punctuation mark in the charged silence. They stood there for a moment, neither speaking, both acutely aware of the space between them. Then, slowly, Adrian reached out, brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. His fingers lingered briefly, warm and reassuring, before he lowered his hand, leaving a subtle tension in the air. I just wanted to see you, he said softly, eyes never leaving hers, to make sure we're really on the same page. Lila's chest tightened with a mix of anticipation and relief. We are, she whispered, stepping slightly closer, her gaze steady despite the flutter in her heart. Adrian's hand found hers this time, fingers intertwining naturally, a gesture that spoke of trust, reassurance, and something deeper than words could capture. They stood together in the quiet apartment, hands clasped, the unspoken promises and shared understanding passing silently between them. Until tonight, he murmured, his thumb brushing across her knuckles. I wasn't sure if I could let myself feel this. But now, his voice softened, almost a sigh. Now, I don't want to hide anything anymore. Lila smiled, warmth flooding her chest. Neither do I, she replied. Her free hand reached to touch his arm lightly, a gentle affirmation of closeness and trust. For a moment, time seemed to slow. The city outside buzzed with life, but inside, there was only them. Two hearts cautiously, deliberately leaning toward each other, walls lowered, and hope taking root. As they lingered in the quiet, The simple yet profound connection, the hand-holding, the soft gaze, the shared breath, marked the beginning of something new. A chapter closed, and a new one, full of possibility, trust, and intimacy, had just begun.